to Get With the Programming. I'm Chase Ingram.
I'm Captain America.
And along with me is Bill Grundler.
Wolverine.
Ooh, and we have a special guest. We have a special guest today, and I can think no better way than to bring this man on than using one of my favorite movie clips of all time.
Dylan! You son of a bitch.
Oh, yes. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, Mr. Dylan Malitsky. What do you think, bro? Huh?
I'll be honest, I don't know the pop culture reference all too well. I know the movie.
Bro, that is like
What?
the best Dylan reference in movie cinematic history.
I think it's me being born in 1991 that maybe sets me at a disadvantage.
Oh my! Well,
I forget how old you are sometimes.
man, dude, it's all biceps and Dylan. Come on now.
The Predator handshake originated from that clip. So anytime you see or hear somebody say that, that's what it's from. But like, you know, first of all, Dylan, welcome to the show, buddy. I think it's hilarious that people. I don't know if I text this to you, but like, people don't truly understand the undertaking that any competition is, let alone Wodapalooza. And you're in a bit of a different background. Usually, if you're on a podcast, which is rare, so thank you for being here. It's a different background. It's because you have yet to leave Wodapalooza.
No,
Living
us where you're
quarters
at right
right there. Living quarters.
I still don't know if we're ever going to, and it feels like the week after drags on forever. So yeah, we're
Well,
now
aren't
on
you
day 3 of loadout?
aren't you going to be setting up for next year's like in 8 days? So you're just going to stay there anyway? Is that how it works?
No, we're going to be flying straight from here to Southern California and setting up. underneath the
Well, and we were talking before we came on is that you said that the build out for Wodapalooza is 2 weeks long, but then the breakdown is another week, let alone the week of what's going on. I mean, my goodness, bro, like how fried are you right now?
You know, I've gotten some good rest the last couple of days, and excuse anybody coming in behind me. Like I said, we're in our mobile
Hey,
command.
man, this is it. This is the real stuff right here. People need to see this.
At the moment, but yeah, two weeks of load in. I'm feeling pretty good though. You know, during the weekend of or leading into the weekend, some of those nights can be pretty late. But now, at least right now, we're getting full night's sleep, working till 6 p.m. and just really tying up the last little bit of loose ends. Like the barge is just about ready to depart, and probably back to Chesapeake, Virginia, that was towed in. We've gotten the gangways off, so like all that's starting to come apart. But no, I'm feeling pretty good comparatively speaking to past years.
Man, dude, it's crazy because you've gone from like the rise of occupational jobs that you've had from when you first started at the first Wodapalooza, you know, calling stuff, helping Guido out, calling on the floor, all that, to where you are now. You know every single year what it's going to feel like. Does it feel the same, or does it ever get like, okay, I got this. I'm just in cruise mode. I know where we are. Does it get easier or no?
I would say that one thing, something I've obtained over the years for sure, is a greater understanding of what the chaos is going to feel like. Like in the face of a lot of adversity and a lot of challenge, you know, one of the things I don't know if you've talked to anyone. There were a lot of things thrown our way this year that were out of the ordinary.
No,
yeah,
it was so smooth. What are you talking about? There weren't any changes, were there?
Weather being one, but like even in lead up, like in the months before, even like the week of, there was like constantly obstacles thrown at us this year. And in the early years, you know, if you're not used to responding to those adverse situations, you tend to panic. And even inside, like you're wondering, like, am I going to be able to pull this off? Is this going to be the year that things go wrong? And I think that as we've gotten more and more, I've gotten more and more calloused, I guess is the way to put it, or just apt at handling it. And same with my team. So like as we had to pivot, we were ready for it. And to that end, yes, I've become less of like the highs and lows, because you just know how it's going to go. You got to, one of my mentors and former bosses would say, you might have heard him say it, Mr. Matt O'Keefe would say, events wouldn't be events without events, and that couldn't be more true.
That's good.
That's a good one.
Well, I mean, the most forward-facing thing, and you guys have faced this adversity before, is the weather, and we'll talk about how that affected the programming when we get to that. But what is, if you can speak to it, what was one of those basic curveballs you got leading into this that maybe was new or unexpected?
Yeah, so I'd say, the biggest one, talking about the barge earlier, there's a number that were really big, but I'll focus on one. So we were let know about a month and a half before the event load-in that the fountain, which the fountain is, a huge symbol of the venue, right? It's in the dead center around where all the brands are, and then one of the main stages, the Bayside stage. We were let know by the city of Miami that essentially it was off limits. And some of you are like, oh, well, that doesn't matter. The fountain doesn't work anyway. You don't use it. But no, if you've ever been and you see, we actually build the bleachers into the fountain. So, and I haven't talked about this publicly at all yet. So this is the first time I'm telling anybody. But basically, they basically let us know that, hey, the structure of the fountain itself is in such disrepair you can't use it. They put a fence around it. So we were forced a month and a half out to make a really tough decision. We were faced with three things. It could either be, do we change venues in the 11th hour? Like, we're a month and a half away. Do we move to somewhere completely different? Two, do we reduce a heck of a bunch of seats on that Bayside stage and just create like a more intimate environment, a smaller stage that wouldn't be as conducive to storytelling? It wouldn't be as fan friendly. Or do we go big, which was try to do something that would blow people's minds, and that was bring in a fully functional barge that we were calling the
crazy,
which presented its own hurdles. The easy thing to do would have been like, oh, just reduce the seats and create a small stage, right? But what would that do to the perception from the fan of and the athletes of Wodapalooza? And so we decided to go with the more difficult route, the more expensive route, because it's all about elevating year after year. And I think we accomplished what we set out to. So now the stage where the competition was actually became where the bleachers were built. And instead, the athletes all competed out on the SS celebration, the barge that you saw in some photos and videos.
Dude, that barge was unbelievable to watch.
Dude, the barge was so sick.
It was so amazing. I mean, we've been there so many times. We've seen, what that stage looks like, and the fact that you guys made the flooring the exact same setup as what you had on the old stage, I think it was amazing. But getting back to when you had that and you were trying to decide which way to go, like, what does that war room look like? I mean, is it like everyone, hey, we need ideas from everyone? Or are you just like, hey, I'm going to go sit at the bar and I'm going to come up with something? Or what's the army look like to come up with an idea or your list of ideas of what to go with?
It's funny you say army, right? It's a small group, right? We maybe just like the CrossFit Games, there's probably this perception of it being a big organization. The TYR Wodapalooza, while we're part of a larger organization in Loud and Live, we're still a small team that's executing this on the day-to-day. And think about this, like if it would have been 6 months ago, no problem. We could have for sure pivoted, found something that made sense, and we had time to do it. But being a month and a half out from the event, that presents a host of issues. All of our permitting's approved. Like our programming's done. Everything's done. There's so many things that are in the works that from that moment forward, we have to reimagine the entire layout of the park, even if you think it's just a small thing, because it really does deeply affect also the load-in. Like the build of everything is affected by how that barge is going to get in. We have to put a crane right on that stage to be able to crane over the gangways or crane over the truss. So anyway, point being that when we sat in the room, we literally just created a list. And this is what I think my team and I have gotten really good at, which is just assessing the situation, presenting all the possible options, and then analyzing what is almost a SWOT analysis of each one, right? Like what would be the cost implications? What are the benefits? What are the pros? What are the cons? And then taking it back to my leadership and Marco and Nelson, who lead the charge at Loud and Live, and say, if we do this, this is what the outcome will be. Like bringing the barge, it's gonna blow everybody's minds, but it's gonna cost X. But as a result, we'll have the same number of seats. So, that being just one option, and also comparing the other two. But we didn't land exactly which way we were going for probably a week, so that slowed us down a bunch because there were so many unknowns. Like, okay, it's one thing to bring the barge in, but like we really don't understand the permit implications or the cost implications. Like, who would have thought that like insurance for a barge would cost $50,000, right? Like, it's just a barge. We just bring it in. We set some ramps.
Yeah,
great.
Just a boat. We can pontoon this shit, right?
We had to fabricate the gangways from scratch. So like, those are things that, you think they just come with the barge. No, we had to, the two ramps that go onto the stage. And like, so it's a much more complex situation because you almost can't just decide one and run with it. You almost have to run 2 or 3 of them in parallel all the way to a certain point before you take one leap, because there was questions like, would we even get the permits in time? Like, will we have what we need to pull this off? Right. So we can't just like put all our eggs in that basket and then that one doesn't happen. Well, then now what? It was definitely an adventure this year, but I will tell you, the team just kept poise and composure. And That's what amazed me most about this year.
Dude,
for
I'm
sure.
I'm so glad I asked that question. You answered it, because in my mind, when I saw the barge, I was like, freaking genius. Like, okay, because Bayside is one of the most iconic competition venues in all of the space. It is. It's right up there with the tennis
It's the
stadium.
tennis
Right?
stadium.
We
dude,
know what the
totally.
tennis stadium is, but
Yeah.
like that's the tennis stadium of Wodapalooza. It's Bayside, right? It's iconic. And the idea of maybe losing that because of the fountain issue that you were talking about, in my head I was like, look at these guys, they're getting in a barge and they're going to build more stands in the most popular venue. In my head I was like, freaking geniuses.
Right.
You know, Bill, we know, it was like 6 weeks ago, it was like, hey, we're going to get this barge from Virginia ferried down here and get the permitting, and you guys did that in 6 weeks to go time is insane.
Yeah. I have to give a lot of credit to Andre. So Andre Trinidad is actually Guido's brother.
No way.
He's
Oh,
come
no
aboard as
way.
our
All right.
production lead. Yeah. So like keeping it all within the family. Andre really pulled it off. We had like 4 or 5 options for barges. Some were smaller, some were bigger, some weren't available, some were. And how we landed on that one, which was the biggest one. I can't imagine that being any smaller of a competition floor. It played out so perfectly.
Yeah.
And like we said, I think the intention was, how do we not just look at this as like rectifying an issue, but instead elevating the experience. And I for sure think that we accomplished that in the product.
Dude, I think it was
think you guys
great.
nailed it.
It was amazing. Yeah.
Thank you.
It was
Did
amazing.
did the aliens that came through that mall a few weeks prior have any changes to the programming because of what the hell is going on over there?
No,
Like leading
man.
up to Wodapalooza, I'm like, guys, this is like end of days. We're like a week out from Wodapalooza.
It's so weird. Yeah, super bizarre. Sorry, guys.
No, you're good, man.
All good. You got some folks that are working here.
Yeah.
No,
I want to
so
see the heroes in the back. It's all good. You guys are doing some work.
they're all walking by. Yeah. No. Interestingly enough, so Loud and Live puts on the New Year's event in Bayfront Park, which happens just before
Mm-hmm.
we load in. So like when you were seeing that was happening just outside of the venue of another event we were putting on. I didn't hear anything about any aliens. And if I did, I'm not at liberty to talk about it. I'm sorry.
All right, yeah. So we'll push on there as we go past that. Well, you know, Dylan, you know, I know we're here to talk about the programming. We'll specifically focus on the individual programming. And coming in, you guys, I would say did something a little bit different. You correct me wrong with the timing, but you guys are very early with announcing what these events were going to be coming in to gain interest and excitement and maybe like, you know, encourage some athletes like, hey, come on, this is going to be pretty cool. What am I correct with those coming out a little bit early, and what led to that decision?
Sure. Yeah, it was definitely that. I think, you know, we talked last year about the intention from our side to try to encourage athletes to want to do both individual and team on the elite side. That's one. And so in order to do that, I think we needed to, you know, I think last year we said that it would be fine. The volume wouldn't be much. There wouldn't be overlap. And then I think we didn't necessarily deliver on that promise. And that was a big intention from our side of getting ahead of it and showing them directly, like, look, this is what you have. What you see is what you get. And to give them that confidence. But in the same vein, you know, also in working with the PFAA and just really taking their lead on what they consider to be, which is the opinion of the athletes for the most part. They wanted to see them earlier. And so rather than things changing on the fly, although they still had to because of some issues with weather, it was a combination of both of them. Their request and then to also wanting to instill confidence that, hey, this is not going to be as much of a beatdown if you do one or the other or both.
With that program in the tight handshake that you had with the PFAA this year, which I really honestly think is probably the first time we've seen that much cooperation between an event and that organization, which is, I mean, it's pretty cool because obviously the PFAA is wanting to be involved. So was it them coming to you to say, hey, we want to be involved, or were you really wanting to bring them in to kind of showcase what they were able to do, to give them kind of a heads up to see if they were going to make any changes or if you needed to make any changes on any of the programming, or what really spawned that joining?
Yeah, so they were not involved necessarily with the actual programming itself, right? So the way that it worked, I think, if I were to go back chronologically, I heard about their session that they were having at this year's games, And I was proactive in wanting to go and attend. And just literally to put our hand out and say like, hey, we see what you're trying to do. We respect it. We think it's all in an effort to provide a safe and fair experience for fitness athletes. And so as a result, I think they were a little bit, when I was in the room, it was all athletes and agents. I know that they felt a little uneasy about an event organizer being there because they were talking about the things they wanted to talk about the events. They told me afterwards. But I really was just there as like extending an olive branch. Like, how can we do more together? Because we know it's what the athletes ultimately will want. And so with that, we entered into a more formal partnership, which is where they provided basically a list to us after some calls with our team of like, these are the things we would ideally like to see. Let's say there was 100 things.
Okay.
Our team went through and said, okay, maybe like 60 or 70 of them are actually feasible given the event landscape of the TYR Wodapalooza. They're just some things that we can't accomplish. Unfortunately, we can't guarantee that there will be 8 feet between any barbell between one athlete and another. The stages are too small.
Right.
We'll keep them as far apart as possible. So like we kind of like redlined their document of requests and then said, hey, we can agree to all of these. Are you cool with that? And yes. So we signed off, and it was more of us just saying, this is an intentional step of working with each other. And I'm sure there's going to be tons of key learnings about how to improve the process for next year. But I thought it was a nice first step. Our teams worked well together. Mitch is a great dude. They were awesome. And I would highly recommend us working with them again, because they also help take some of the thinking out of some of the decision-making around like movement standards and some things. Like, whereas in the past, maybe there was some ambiguity, like they gave us basically a guide of like, hey, this is how a lot of the other events and how we feel like these things should be judged to remove any sort of gray area. And we adopted a lot of them, if not all of them.
Interesting. That was going to be one of my questions. Like, what was the simplest thing they gave you where you're like, oh, of course?
Yeah, I mean, if I were to pull up like their document and list some of them, it was like amount of time between warming up and actually competing. Like, in the lift event on Thursday, like making sure there was platforms by the stage. These are things that we have in the back of our minds, but we wouldn't necessarily deliver on. But the fact that they put it there was a no-brainer. We had to provide them with another place to do so. Another big one was they drove, we'll talk about it, but the workout Deja Vu, that was a 2-parter. Actually, not Deja Vu.
It was a 3-parter, 2 scores.
Right.
Deja Vu, 2 scores. Yep, 2 scores. In a previous case, we probably had scored that at 100 points each, but with some rationale from Brent, it made sense. We ended up going with the 50-50 route in order to not make all these movements weighted unfairly higher than all the other events they were faced with throughout the weekend. But there was a ton of things that ultimately ended up being no-brainers for us to adopt. Even like on movement standards for dips, movement standards on sandbag cleans, like things that they said were important to them to avoid any sort of challenge. And I think it made for a better weekend for all.
Was there any pushback of when you weren't able to they gave you their list? You said, we can give you these things. Was there any negotiation past that? Like, well, no, you really need to give us this other one. Was there any I want to know, what was the pushing back and forth with that? Or was it pretty simple since it was the first time for both groups, really?
It was simple. It was figuring out, I think they were trying to be really respectful. Knowing that they were coming in and that we were giving them this platform. We never really pushed back on them, but here's one actually, now that I remembered, one that was a super no-brainer. Was on Deja Vu. Got a note after, and they said, hey, what's your plan for box jump overs? Are you going to ask that they step down? Are they allowed to bound? And initially it was going to be, hey, just do it however. And then the request came in from their team and said like, hey, just let us know what you're thinking there. It's obviously a hazard. There's 1,200 athletes that are going to be performing box jump overs, and that's when we required the step down on the box jump over. So that was another example of one that was like, hey, consider it done. Don't even think about it. Like it's the safer route and it makes sense. But no, there was never ever like a tug of war, at least not this year. Maybe that'll change as they gain more confidence and more, more prestige and respect. But we wanted to give them, I think there wasn't anything for us to push back on. So it was very easy. It was just an easy process. We were able to give them rationale for why we could do certain things too. Yeah. And they understood.
Yeah. I mean, that goes with any negotiation. There's compromises here and there when 2 parties are coming together with certain ideas, demands, and concepts. But I give you guys a lot of props for really being the first major competition to go out there and do this partnership. And I would assume it's only one of those things that will grow and get better as you guys have this relationship moving forward. And shoot, I know we're done with Wodapalooza Miami, but SoCal coming up in September, which I mean, the amount of buzz that's going around that, I can't imagine. I know you've got some things to just pull back from probably before we preach there, but I'm excited to see what that looks like. I mean, more Wodapalooza is never a bad thing, what you guys put out there. But one question before we pop into the programming is from Jonathan Ortega is like Heat One app. Heat One app was all over the place at Wodapalooza. They had some really cool graphics of like fan picks and team picks and what they picked. And I love it. I'm a fantasy guy when it comes to that. And so when you look at this app as part of, it looked like it was a huge part of TYR Wodapalooza this year. What spawned that idea?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, and you're 100% right. It was everywhere as much as we could put it. A couple things. One would be, I know Tyler. Tyler's a great dude, and he's developing a great product. And I think for all the right reasons, as a fan of the sport, right? It's all about creating more engagement around what it is that all of us are doing. Like if he makes the sport more, if he helps make the sport more exciting to watch, more exciting to follow, that behooves everybody. So knowing that he was doing that too, we chatted a while ago about how to integrate the app in a more formal way, because I know they've kind of done it more informally. They've kind of done it guerrilla style against the Rogue and the games. But from our side, we sort of coupled it. We partnered it more officially, and then also coupled it with our partnership with Pliability. So it was really the Heat app by Pliability as part of that was a partner of the event. So the three of us all spearheaded this effort to create an app that that would keep folks both on site and remote more engaged. It's one thing too, right? We talk about this at the games. I'm sure you have. Is there comes a point in the weekend, especially if the event is 3, 4, 5 days long, where it's sort of a runaway train. You know who's going to win. Yeah. But if you have these additional storylines, like in fantasy football, your home team maybe is just they're crapping the bed.
Week 17 in the NFL was never more important.
Right, agreed. It makes it so much more fun, and if that's going to help move the sport forward, I'm all for it. And again, their team did an amazing job, and all we did in terms of that partnership was help bring Pliability into the fold, but then too, just give them unfettered access to the data and info to make sure that they were keeping it up to date. Whereas in the past with other events, maybe they haven't. I think that speaks to sort of a similar collaboration we have with the PFA. It's just bringing others that are looking to help bolster our sport and event. And because they want to, they already wanted to anyway. They just needed a formal invitation, and we gave it to them.
The thing I love there is you talked about like keeping things up to date. Like as things changed, like the way you guys pushed it out and made those calls from the outside looking in, we've seen how things kind of work on the inside, but like, I felt like this year you guys were so much faster on making a decision, pushing it out, and then moving to the next thing instead, like, I feel like sometimes it's a lot of like, let's just not make the wrong decision. And we just kind of sit until we have to make a decision. It looked like you guys were just like, look, we're making this call. We're going forward.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that goes back to what I said at the onset of the conversation, which is we just have a really good team. And I don't say that in a way that's just like, pumping them up. I mean it. Like, I'm more amazed by how they responded in the face of some of these pivots. I didn't know they had it in them, but it's because we have such a veteran team, a team that's been part of this ecosystem in sport for so long that when we say, hey, on the fly in that moment, we're going to change from kettlebell snatches to the movements that we changed them to, right? It ended up being lunges and some shoulder overhead. They didn't even blink an eye. There was no semblance of chaos. So I just think our team is so dang good. I'd put our team against anybody any day. They're truly amazing. I really mean that.
Love it, man. And I'll tell you right now, is like Bill and I has had the pleasure to work with you man to man, whether it's, local throwdowns, Granite Games, Wodapalooza, CrossFit Games, semifinals. Like we've all been in the trenches together for a long time. And what I do commend you guys on a lot is that you do have to deal with a lot of stuff coming at you from all sides, whether it's the weather or the barge or, the list goes on when it comes to live events, as you mentioned that quote by Matt O'Keefe. But the thing I really do like that you guys do is you're always willing to try something new to push the envelope to better. or fresh. And it's never make a change to make a change or make a splash to just make a splash. It's like you guys are always willing to take that next step, which a lot of people I think are too comfortable to maybe try. So I always commend you guys a lot on doing some cutting edge things from time to time.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. We certainly try. I will be the first to say we don't make all the right decisions.
Nobody does, right? Nobody
If we don't
does.
try, if we don't try, we'll never know. Like, the other big
Yeah.
thing we made this year was to our seating, right? In the last couple of years, I don't want to use the word fail, but we could absolutely have improved our ability when we've sold tickets. There were lines out of the bleachers, and people were very upset because they thought they paid for something and they didn't receive the service. So anyway, that was one thing that this year we made a big intentional change with our ticketing structure, offering festival passes, which just gets you campus access, elite passes, which guaranteed you access to watch the elite, and then VIP was just VIP. And I thought that went pretty darn well. Maybe we'll tweak it for the future. There's quite a bit of self-reflection and team reflection that we have to do over the next couple of weeks. But that was another example of an intentional change we made to try to improve the event overall and the experience for everybody. Like this year, the VIP was the same. There's still a lot to debrief on, but I'm feeling pretty good about what the final outcome was.
I think that's one of the things that, in vein of what Chase is talking about, how you guys do push the limit. You push the limit, and you always come back, and it's very apparent that you guys have a big after action report that you guys do, because there's always a change from whatever the big complaint was the year before to where you don't see that the next time. Whatever the big complaint was, there's always a push to clear that one out. So I think that's important, because you definitely are aware of what's happening. You're not just going in it with blinders and going like, well, yeah, screw those guys. They're just a bunch of complainers anyway. They're going to complain, because you're going to get complainers on everything. It just happens that way. But you guys always really make a very, a huge effort to fix those things while still pushing the boundaries and trying things out, see what happens, but you go with it. And I really like the fact that when you decide to make a step, you're all in and you're committed to that step, and then you assess it afterwards, which is awesome.
Thanks, guys. Yeah.
All right. So let's focus our attention to the program. We had 5 events, I believe 6 scores, and we'll touch on the two-parter there in a little bit. But when Bill and I when we analyze program, the first question we always ask is, what's the purpose? What's the goal? What are we trying to do? For you and Wodapalooza, I know we talk about fitness festival all the time. The thing I think is so cool about Wodapalooza is that everybody in the space is practically there in person, whether they're competing individually or maybe on a 3-person team, possibly both or not at all. But the thing is, they're there, they're competing at a very high level for an incredible prize purse. But they're also so chill and so accessible across the board. And you guys have really cultured this vibe. People know what Wodapalooza feels like you don't have to sell it to anyone anymore, what Wodapalooza is. For you, when you're looking at the programming going individuals, what are you exactly looking at to accomplish overall when it comes to the programming picture?
Yeah, there's 3 words that come to mind, and I'm sure they come up whenever you talk to anyone. And maybe I don't know if they're the exact same, but the 3 that come to mind are fair, safe, and fun. And those orders, I would say, are virtually equal. It's hard to put any one above another because it's definitely a fine balance. This year, you probably felt more than ever that safety was a chief concern, and that comes in light of the weather. But we want people to leave there saying and feeling as if it was extremely exciting, not just to perform the workouts, but to also watch. And given the challenges posed by our competition floors, just the venues in general, because of the size more than anything else, that seems to be something we've got to put even extra focus on, because how do we create this storytelling that makes sense? And then Matt just asked fair, what does that mean? And what we mean by fair is well-rounded, but not just that. Also, because of the size of the fields of play, it'd be very easy to have issues where somebody isn't traveling the same distance than another. So sometimes that affects the order of the movements because it's an impossibility of a way to remedy like for example, when they swim, they have to run around the field of play down a ramp and then come back up
Yeah.
and then run around the front so that they're running equidistance. But maybe that's not fair if people are going to get time capped, because if the swim only counts when they get back to their lane, some people are running more in the beginning and not at the end. So anyway, yeah, I would say fair, safe, and fun. Definitely fun is at the forefront, has been in years past. This year, maybe a little more emphasis on safe.
Yeah. And I like the way you put that is, I mean, you could think of those as 3 circles and more like a Venn diagram, right? That sweet spot in the middle, you could just label as Wodapalooza, right? Like everybody's, it's across the board. And we don't mean fair as like everybody gets an equal, like it's an equal opportunity to compete. And it's not like my bar was over here, that was this, or the like I said, the program was all strength and I got screwed. Like I like how you put those 3 together and that's your focus. And when we look at the first event, you talk about competition venues being a challenge depending on what it is you want to program. And Tina Hills, to me, is, look, you have so many amazing venues at Wodapalooza. Tina Hills with that amphitheater-like vibe. People are sitting in the grass, you know, like Woodstock style, just at a concert. And then you have this amphitheater stage. It's a beautiful venue, but it's also a small venue. What are some of the challenges you see when, say, programming specific events at that venue at Tina Hills?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's all about the size. It's all about the size. That's why I would hate to say that when you come to the TYR Wodapalooza that the stages, it's almost predictable about what you can expect at each of them, but you'll start to see the same types of movements, and we have to program around what those things offer. Like you haven't seen a pull-up rig in a pretty long time on Tina Hills, right? And that's certainly not a coincidence. Flagler's the big stage that can fit a 6-foot wide lane. You know, it ends up being a 120-foot wide lane rig. You know, on Bayside, there's not going to be another stage where people are swimming from, but in Tina Hills in particular, just the size, you didn't see a barbell there this weekend other than the 6 platform setup for the lift. And I mean, that also means that you've got to have a ton more heats to get the athletes through, right? Which also means that the time domains have to be shorter. Like this one you just pulled up, I'm sure about to dig into, Double or Nothing, was meant to be inspired by the online challenge and qualifier event, which had some similarities in terms of the snatch complex. But ultimately, the time domain, I wish they would have had more time. I wish we could have done more attempts. It was just a byproduct of the challenges of the stage, but it also created a cool element of like, you've got to perform or not. It was like, you're in the spotlight. It's either deliver or don't. Right.
And we saw 2 attempts at a snatch and clean and jerk at the CrossFit Games. So 2 attempts isn't unfamiliar. We've seen that at regionals in the past. I know Bill and I talked about Dubai this year where they had 1 minute to hit 1 lift in that time frame for both that. And you talk about 2 attempts here, 1 snatch, 1 hang snatch, and then the tiebreaker being max overhead squat, which is akin to the qualifier that you had. So now you take something people got tested with and you level it up here at Wodapalooza, which is something we don't usually see. Sometimes I think the rub is, well, the qualifier was so much different than what we had there. Is like, it's not even the same people getting the same test. And here it's very, very similar. But you just touched on it a little bit, is like, we've had this discussion in the past, is like, there's things that you want to do and there's things that you can do. And you're saying is like, look, 3 would have been great, somewhat ideal in a setting like this, but because of, it's not just the elite competing, right? You guys have 2,000 athletes in what, 15 divisions? How many? I'm probably undershooting that.
48 divisions.
Get through. Yeah, 28 divisions? 48 divisions?
48
okay,
divisions.
I am so sorry. I just undersold that so bad. 48 divisions to run through a test like this on a stage that can fit maybe 40 people shoulder to shoulder.
Yep. No, 100%. It certainly poses a challenge. But I think it was a great way to start the weekend for the elite individuals. And again, I really liked the tie break, which was again reminiscent of the individuals. Like it's not just 1 pound, it's how many more overhead squats can you get. So yeah, ultimately this was one that I really liked as a starting point.
And I know Bill and I have always thought is like, I really like personally, I do like the nod back to the qualifier, but I also love that it wasn't just a 1 lift. It wasn't a snatch, or a deadlift or just a one-off. You put in a complex, but then you added more lifts into the tiebreaker. I really like that you added that to the fray to get out of this snatch, clean and jerk, one rep max monotony I feel like we've been in for the last couple of years. Not with Wodapalooza, I just mean with everything.
No, just in general, man. We see that sort of the same 1 rep lift all the time. I mean, even when we see it where you go from the semis and there's a lift to the games, it's almost the exact same lift. The Open had almost something exactly similar. So I think when you have an event that's able to bring in their strength test, I mean, we know that that's what it is. This is the lifting test. So, but you tweak it to where there's another way to sort of get some sort of a just not a classic, so you know who all your lift. I mean, of course, the big lifters always do the big lifting. We know they're going to do that, but at least it switches it up a little bit. So anytime you have a complex in there, I think that's always a plus because it mixes it up for the field. And honestly, I think it makes it more exciting.
Yeah, the last piece of this that I'll mention on this one in particular was the idea of being able to test those folks that qualified and see, hey, can you perform on the big stage? And then see how some of those folks that were invited that are going head to head against them. First of all, we review their videos, but I'm wondering if when they arrive on site, can they perform? The thing about a qualifier is you could literally take an attempt, stop your video if you don't hit it.
Yeah.
Take a 3-minute break, start the video again, try it again, and have unlimited attempts. But how will you perform in prime time? And then how do those scores line up against the people that were invited that didn't get a chance to do this in the qualifier? So that was
I like that.
I like that.
big inspiration.
Yeah. I mean, a little insight to the event of what you're testing people with. That is outside of like how strong are you? Like, can you perform under the bright lights? And like you said, dude, you totally nailed it. Actually, when you think about it, it's like, oh, I missed my lift. Start video over and then start it again. And now can you do it on the big stage and in 2 lifts? So I did like that. And on that Thursday, that was kind of the unfortunately the end of status quo coming into it, which we'll talk about. And the next event you had was, and I would say coming in, I thought was one of the we'll just, it's like, how much does it suck for the weather to come in and take away things that and Bill and I have talked about this. What Cortadito was before coming in, I thought was one of the coolest events of the weekend.
Oh, man,
and unfortunately,
totally.
weather completely changed what that was going to be.
Yeah, that was. I have to be completely honest and tell you, it was really painful to change those events for me personally, for our team, because a lot of this programming happened 6 months, 7 months, 8 months prior to the event day. And so as a result, to have to make that call, while we know it was the right thing, it was tough. It was certainly tough. But again, knowing that given the conditions, it wasn't acceptable to try to run that as is. And could we have changed some elements in maybe a slightly different way? Like we talked quite a bit. The other thing I'll make mention of too is that months before, so maybe let's say we programmed these 8 months in advance. Genuinely, we started with the event and then we programmed the qualifier.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, we programmed the event first and we backed in, because programming the online challenge and qualifier is far easier than the event itself. The event has so many nuances to it. But
just 20 divisions, right? That's
but in this scenario, the contingency events, which are probably done 2 months in advance, we had them in our back pocket and we executed them. But still, we knew they wouldn't have the same level of excitement as what the original intention was of that. That it is what it is, and I was hoping it would only be a one time, but it ended up happening throughout the weekend.
Well, and just to give you a tip of the cap on what your original one was originally it was 21-15-9 parallel bar dips, hang power cleans at 185 and 125, so weights being the same, into 15-12-9 shouldered overhead and bar muscle ups. Beautiful. Really beautiful. And that was the big bummer. It wasn't what this event was in particular and what you guys had to pivot to because of the rain. I know what you wanted to, but damn, dude, that you guys nailed that one coming into it. So I can only imagine what a bummer it was. And this was the contingency thing, like you said before, is we switched to 30-20-10 parallel bar dips, deadlifts into 15-10-5 front squats, and then 30-20-10 bar facing burpees at the same weights. When you are building out these contingencies, like what are you guys focusing on primarily? Is it, well, I mean, you talked about your 3 pillars, right? Fair, safe, and fun. Are you looking at, okay, what is the safest thing to do while achieving maybe the same stimulus, or are we trying to hit the same movement patterns? What are some of the things you guys are looking at when you are building out a contingency event?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I think one thing that can't change, right, for the most part, because of the implications is the time domain. The time domain has to stay the same. And how do we preserve as much of the original test as possible without completely going into left field? So, for example, in this scenario, the 30-20-10, when it was 21-15-9, I don't know, it probably didn't read it initially, is that there were 3 traverses in the first round. So it was 21-15-9, but plus a traverse, 7 dips, traverse back, 7 dips.
Damn.
So we
Even
felt
better.
like that was
Even better. Damn,
Yeah,
bro. I'm
totally.
so
Even
sorry.
better. God.
Yeah. So anyway, that we wouldn't have. So to that end, we thought, okay, so how do we still add a little more volume on that movement in particular? And we thought by adding some more parallel bar dips, and then
Okay.
hang cleans. We just thought it was unsafe, but it's still a grippy hinged style movement. And then when you get into the front squats and bar facing burpees, the gymnastic skill went out the window. There's just really nothing you can do. And we,
Yeah.
how many pull-ups can people do in a weekend? We were a little bit at a loss there. There were probably a couple other things that we could do, but given the time in which we had to make the call and then make the pivot, we really couldn't do anything different. And I thought this would could still lead itself to, when we say the word fun, like a fast and climactic finish. And I think it did. I think it delivered in that regard.
Did you guys still do the same, or did you do any of the testing of the contingency plans, or did you just have it kind of in your back pocket? It's raining, pull it out, and we just, all right, switch it to this without any sort of an idea? Or did you guys actually see what it looked like beforehand, just to see the validity of it?
We do test it. It's certainly not to the extent like we're making tons of tweaks to land on what the final product is for the original programming. In this regard, this one in particular, it ends up being like 1 or 2 folks that are testing to make sure, like, hey, is it finishable within the time domain? Well, there are any glaring holes as part of it? But I would say that we aren't preparing them in parallel as if they're like both equal in terms of what the final outcome would be. So as much as we can, given how much work we have outside of just the programming itself.
And the thing I talked to a few athletes, and they actually agreed as far as like time domain stimulus, it was fairly close, for as close as you could get, because it's not like, in the second part of this test where it's like it's bar muscle ups. Like there's nothing else you can really do in rain that will elicit the same physical stimulus as a bar muscle up would. That's just out of the question. It's like, oh, why don't we do toes bar pull? It's like, because we're not hanging on to a wet pull up bar, period. Right? We can't substitute a different gymnastics pulling movement. It's just not in the cards, and I understand that. But it is tough, right? Because, not to beat a dead horse, it's like you see what you had, and it was fantastic. And is the fear when you change this, even outside of what the actual programming is like it'll change maybe who would do well or perform differently at a new event?
There's certainly that thought in our minds as we're going back and making an adjustment, but that's why we try to preserve as much as we can.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're looking at it almost movement by movement and rep scheme by rep scheme, and and try to keep it as similar as possible. But that's not like, I wouldn't say we're looking at that and like identifying who should win this test and will the person we thought initially would win it with that, like we're not doing any of that. So I would say that isn't probably a core focus. It is a thought in our mind, but it's certainly not I would say the end all be all decision.
I actually like that answer, because you talk to programmers, like if they're focused on like who would do well, they're almost missing the point of what a GPP cloud elite, mythological athlete would do with the test itself. And if you think about CrossFit, and we're not punting to, hey, it's all good, it's unknown and unknowable. We're not saying that, but what we are saying is like, listen, things may change. You got to adapt on the fly. It's part of the sport in a sense, right? We don't want it to be, but at the end of the day, it's like, listen, do with what you got. Like if you are who you say you are, you guys should adapt. Maybe it doesn't line up as good for you or as bad for you. But at the end of the day, or 2 days of competition, hopefully it all washes out at the end.
Well, and then the people that do any of the sort of complaining, are the ones that only really would have done well on the other event. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, I get it. Maybe it's personally, I would rather do bar muscle ups than do burpees over a bar, unless it's raining and I'm going to go flop myself all over the floor. You know, I also, as an athlete, wouldn't want to get hurt. So, you know, I think the only real shot you're going to get from anyone is the, well, I wish it was. Yeah, I know, but it's raining. So yes, you were
Yeah.
safe. You know, I mean, it
What do you
wasn't.
want me to do?
Yeah, it's like, okay, great.
It'd be
You know,
so much
we all
worse
wanna
when
do
you
that.
say "fuck it" and then 3 people slip off a pull-up bar.
100%. And how many
Breaking
times have we
arms.
been into events where we see people fall off the rig when it's dry, let alone
And
people
I'm
trying to
gonna
like
get
over
rid
these
of-
big prize purses. So, you know,
Bill and Chase, nobody takes more personal pride in putting together this final product and want to see it on display the way we originally intended. So like it hurts us just as much as it hurts them to make that adjustment. But just knowing it's the right thing to do given the circumstance. The other thing is a possibility is completely manipulating the weekend schedule. But then look how this weekend turned out. If we would have, there was some
Right. It's like, cool.
move deja vu to the following day and maybe conclude with that at the end, or Cortadito to like the first event on Friday, but then it rains every day, so it would have been a moot point, and that would have really probably messed with people if they were planning their weekend out knowing what it was. At least it was test by test, and probably wouldn't have been fair. You know, at that point, I'm starting to question the fairness of like manipulating the order of certain events because we want to preserve some tests versus another.
Yeah.
well,
And I'll say this. Sorry, go ahead, Bill.
I was gonna say we'll run over each other now. I'll get in real quick. The fair thing I think was great was one of the points where you had the contingency for the women. When I don't remember, I think it was the 5th event. Maybe it was the final event. For the women, you were gonna run the men as is, and then right before they came out, you went right back to the contingency plan. What was great was every athlete that was competing all did the same. The fairness, everyone did the same version. Even if you would have had 2 different, like the men doing one version, the women doing the other version, at least everyone was doing their version, and you kind of kept that all the groups together, which I think that was important. You could tell that you guys were very aware of that necessity throughout the whole competition.
That's a great point, Bill. That's a big part of the risk, right? So like even if the weather clears up, we're like, okay, cool, no, we can roll back to the original.
Right.
But what happens if mid heat or we get through that heat, the next heat, it starts to sprinkle a little bit, and then you call into question the fairness of that. Trust me, it is really, really hard, and the pressure on our team's shoulders is real. Again, our team has gotten so good at responding in the face of adversity, but that doesn't mean that there's not an immense weight on our shoulders of, am I making the right decision? Because Mother Nature ultimately decides. It's It's not for me. Like hindsight's 20/20, but in the moment you're like, did I make the right move by changing it? And maybe we went the safer route in a lot of situations than in the past, the conservative route of just like, okay, let's err on the side of caution here, more so than. You know, if I go back to the year 2016 when it was dubbed Wodapalooza, which I think
right.
Me and Bill in a van broadcasting from a GoPro.
One GoPro.
Overhead squats in the rain.
Yeah,
like,
the hands in the GHD.
Boy, have we come a long way in terms of making sure we're preserving the safety of the athletes, because that was not a consideration back then.
Dude, and you guys have had massive amounts of experience because literally every single year there's been something with the weather, whether it's raining once, whether it rains right in the middle of where you have to stop from one heat to the next heat to dry the bars and dry the floor. I think that was happening last year, 2 years ago.
Yeah, one of the nighttime events. Yeah.
Yeah, or whether you're having a typhoon come in and the entire thing's gonna blow over, so everything stops. I mean, you guys are getting good at thinking on your feet like that for sure.
And Dylan, I would just like to tell you is like, listen, of the noise of the change because of what it was, yes, what you guys had was a beautiful test. I love that event. But what you guys did for the athletes and the competition, it was the total 100% right call. Like that was the right move. So regardless of not that you need approval from Bill and I, but like it was the right move. And I think sometimes we forget is like what's happening in the moment, the immensity of the thing you guys are tackling at the time, because everybody sees 20 men and women on the floor, right? Mm-hmm. I thought it was 2.5 times less the number of divisions. My gosh, 20 minutes ago, but it was a total right call, even though it wasn't what you wanted. And we know that it was the right call at the time. So like you guys, you did the right call there.
Thank you.
Switching to Deja Vu, by the way, this is, I love this format. like the 3-5 minute AMRAP, and then for time at the end with a minute in between. It was great. And the way you collected all these off the bat, like how close people could get and where, you had to make some adjustments prior to this one. If you guys are looking at us on screen, it was a 25 or 20 assault cal row, 30 wall balls at 2014. And Bill and I will say together to 10 feet. God bless you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you
Nice
so much.
job.
Great freaking job.
Nice job.
And then into 20 or 14 strict chin over bar pull-ups, 30 box jump overs at 24 and 20, and then 25 single arm dumbbell snatches at 70 and 50. The changes here is that in the middle of this event previously, you had 35 chest to bar pull-ups, a 30 and 24-inch box, and a 170-pound dumbbell. And I'm assuming it's like, listen, we're going to lessen the amount of, I guess, dynamic movement on the pull-up bar for safety reasons with wet pull-up bars. We're going to lower the box height because everything was wet out there, including the boxes, and those things get very slippery. It's not like the rubber matting that's on the floor. Those things they make slip and slides out of this material for a reason. And then you lower the dumbbell weight because of the water that's everywhere, wet hands, and for the time. I'll say this before you even have to explain anything, is that when I initially saw this, and I made the same statement actually unfairly at the CrossFit Games during their interval workout, whereas burpee box jump overs and cal row, I was like, oh, this is just like a class workout. Like that was my original thought, and I'm going to own up to that because listen, I'm a knee-jerk guy just like anybody else, but I have to see it unfold. I'll say this. After this was over, no one got less with the changes that you made. Strict pull-ups, we can talk about that in a second, but a lower box and a lighter dumbbell at the end, I mean, no one got less. In fact, I really liked the more focus on just a work capacity burner that this brought in. It might not be on sexy is written on paper as maybe the other one, chest to bar pull-ups, heavier dumbbells in a higher box. That looks cool. But I almost like this version a bit better because it forced people into a very uncomfortable position. So I just wanted to throw that out there right from the start. Bill, I don't know how you feel, but I'm owning up. I thought it was yuck, and then I was like, okay, actually, that.
Well, the only thing I was really worried about, did you make them put the dumbbells down every time?
We did. It was hand release in the rain that we required them to change hands on the ground. They had to release the dumbbell. That was how we were able to keep the single arm dumbbell snatch in the mix.
What was great with the switches was that, like what you said, Chase, it wasn't about going ballistic. Like the way you went faster was you were not able to stop. So you couldn't do them super fast. So the way you win is you just can't stop at all then. That's the only way you can get ahead. And that is a stimulus that we don't do it's almost like racing kettlebell swings or wall balls. Like you can only go so fast. And the only way you're going to beat someone is like everyone's going to take 2 seconds on a wall ball. So the only way I can get ahead of you is if you stop for 3 seconds and I keep going. So now I'm 1 rep ahead of you. And it was the same type of thing with the strict pull-ups. You saw the capacity, which you can tell we don't do a lot of. Because you're seeing
people have
athletes
been neglecting their strict pull-up.
Oh my, yeah, man, you saw that. And of course we were going to be like, when we saw that, the first glaring thing was, there's no way you're going to be able to hold that standard. There is no way that that's going to be able to be held fairly across it puts the judges in a very precarious position. But even after seeing it, like everybody kind of bobbled about the same. Sure, you're going to have some people that did a little bit more, but all in all, for all of the things that
I was very surprised there.
Dude, shocked at how similar it was. And it really, nobody won or lost based on that. If they did better, it was because they could get more pull-ups in that segment than someone else. You know what I mean? So I thought that was great. And the dumbbell snatch, same thing. You saw people they couldn't do the normal routine with the dumbbell. And that little tweak, all it took was a little tweak, was enough to foul some people up. And you could see fatigue setting in differently than what I thought we would have. So even with the changes, it still ended up being a great race. And I love the way you did the scoring on this. I loved it how every single piece mattered. And that was really, really important. It was hugely important. So I thought that was awesome.
That was definitely the intention. Just to, when you talk about deja vu, I think there were two. It was almost named deja vu, and then double deja vu. One is because it's very much an ode to the 2011 CrossFit Games, the end.
Pat Barbarish, man. We know we were talking about it.
You didn't want any Pat Barbers this year, Wodapalooza.
But that was scored very differently. Obviously, they had like 100 points for each individual AMRAP and the final, so it was extremely heavily weighted. But not in this case. And then this also had a lot of parallels to the online challenge and qualifier event as well, which was lower number of reps for time. So it went 15, 20, 25 of each of these movements with a 1 minute rest between each. So just a little bit different, but similar volume. It was the one that I was most excited to see this weekend. This was my favorite event that we programmed on the individual side. But then when you change the height of the box to lower, and now you're forcing the athletes to put the dumbbells down, I think it slowed it down just enough. And we got about the percentage of folks finishing in the time domains that we had hoped for. Again, I think the only nuance was that strict pull-up, slowing some people down and adding quite a bit of volume there that compared to a chest to bar that they could maybe work through just in a little bit differently. But ultimately, I think it still played out how we envisioned as well, more similarly than any of the other workouts that we had to make adjustments to.
Matt Burns asked this question, and it's the same question I wanted to ask you, is that we haven't seen strict pull-ups in a major competition like this really ever, for a variety of reasons, similar to the same reason we don't see kettlebells swings in competition as much anymore, except for, I guess they brought it back for Helen for the adaptive or the age group divisions at the games this year. But how nervous were you about bringing this movement in, particularly around holding that standard? And what was the standard you guys set for the strict?
Yeah, the standard was just no hip movement, extension at the bottom, chin over bar. It's a really tough one. It's a really, really tough one to judge. There's no question about it. But ultimately, I think it was the least of all the evils in terms of still trying to preserve the test, right? Like complementing, the box jumps and wall balls with alternating movements of, that involve some pulling. So there wasn't anything else on the docket. And the fact that we had to change both of those really put us between a rock and a hard place, because we also didn't want to have to bring any of these, those changes specifically on the chin over bar to any other events that we have throughout the rest of the weekend, like the following day. Luckily, we got lucky with weather there. But yeah, look, it's certainly something we were concerned about. I really don't know what the answer is to solving how we remedy it for the future. I don't think it was perfect by any means. I do think there was some folks that slipped through the cracks. I think actually far less than
but listen, dude,
expected.
Like Bill nailed it, because people there was little kips over here, or people are trying to skirt the line there. They do that every single movement in every event you will ever program. People are going to short the dip. They're going to short their depth. They're going to short their extension. Like that happens in every event. And Bill nailed it, because was that out there and people were like, people are going to kip or short their extension at the bottom? Somewhere it was in there, but nobody really gaining massive advantage on trying to milk that system or gain favor over a judge. Yeah, look, it's going to be out there. It's out there every single event, every time someone does something competitive when it comes to full range of motion. I think it went way better than the initial fear was of what we were going to see. Because when my reaction or anybody's reaction was like, oh, fuck, people are just going to be out here kipping the whole time and nobody's going to be able to hold the standard. And I think all in all, you guys did a great job with what could have been a disaster.
Was that the original contingency plan, or was that kind of an on the fly contingency to go to the strict pull up?
No, it was the original. Yeah, it was the original. There isn't a similar enough of a movement that we could have plugged in there that would have delivered in a similar way. But unfortunately, we knew what we were getting.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it would have been the initial movement program, so ultimately, did we try to hold off as much as possible to make this one change? Like I even after we changed event number 2, my hopes were the whole time, we're like, oh, the weather's going to clear up. We're going to be able to dry the floor. We're going to be able to get it back, because this is the one I was most looking forward to of all.
Let me ask one more thing about that. When you guys made the change, you guys have, well, first of all, you do have an army of volunteers out there, an army of judges out there doing their thing. what was told to them when this was going to be the switch? Like how emphatic of okay, look, strict means, don't let them like what were they told? Because they were, I mean, as far as that with that situation, what's hard is, I mean, I'll tell you right now, I would never want to be a judge ever.
No,
I
there's a
don't
reason
care
why
if you're going to give me I don't care if you're going to give me like some tear shoes or not. Like, I don't want to be a judge because like you are literally, you're stepping into the wolves den. And now here we are in a situation where it all comes down to that strictness in a movement that we have, like Chase said, we haven't done a competition. We all know what strict looks like. And literally, I mean, I would say of all the people that do strict pull-ups, probably 3% actually in the world actually do strict pull-ups.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what did they know going out on the floor when that was going to happen?
I was going to say, I'm not one of those people that do it. So I'm the first to raise my hand. Maybe in competition I would try, but I
always get a little shoulder English at the bottom.
So what I'll say is we have a really great judging team. Kevin Egbulos, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He is our director of judges, and he is for a lot of other events around the world. He travels around, but he works with us almost year round. I'll tell you, I don't know exactly what that conversation looked like from his side. I know he runs a really tight ship with his team. And I'm sure that he was not going to let anything slide as we saw throughout the weekend. The teams had a similar thing happen on Sunday, and I watched a lot of those heats and saw how those played out. So whatever he said, I think generally worked. But I think that's a question we'll have to pose to him at some point.
Yeah.
I have not followed up with him on how that conversation went.
I'm glad it didn't overly affect the event. I mean, because really, we still, even with everyone doing their little quivering as they're going up, like we still got to see the race at the end when it got to the dumbbell, which was really, it was still fun to watch.
And you got to watch people race because, I mean, we got to see Taylor Self. If you guys want to see the event, what it looks like, it's in entirety, go watch Taylor Self do it because he did test this about a week leading up to it. And that dumbbell, like he moved it well, but it just that is going to eat people alive. And when you look at race and what this event really started to look like is I think there was a potential with that higher box and heavier dumbbell to almost deaden a little bit of what that test really could elicit and test for. And like I said, it's like once I saw this unfold, I did like how it went. Once we got to see athletes take the test, we got some great races, work capacity out the wazoo for this test. And in the scheme of things of how things played out, I actually think that fit really well in the spans of the 5 events that you had. The big question coming in outside of the programming, and you touched on this earlier when we talked about the PFAA, was scoring, right? We had part 1, which was total reps completed is score 1. Time to complete the entire event, all the reps, was score 2. You guys had those at 50 and 50. The big question we've seen is like, why didn't you make it 100 and 100?
I think it's a great question. I would say from my side and in our discussions with the PFAA, I think there has been a consistent concern around fairness of events that are the same movements that have multiple scores, the gameability of that. Although this event made it very difficult to gamify the performance exactly, but because the 3, 5, and 8 minute were all the same exact movements and similar, we thought that it would have been most fair and it would reward the same style of athlete. So instead of giving them 200 points and the ability for someone to perform great on both, which I have to go back and see how that actually played out, wasn't the same athlete that the accumulation of reps. I mean, at the very least, that athlete likely had to finish within the 8 minutes, which was a heck of a lot of reps to add to the 8. So it was just making sure that all 5 were weighted equal. And there's really no other way to do it within the 3, 5, and 8 minute format, with 1 being for time and 1 being an accumulation of reps.
And was that posed to you as, we don't think that these movements should be weighted the same, so cut it in half? Or did they come to you with like, here's one option, or how about we go 75 points for each one of those, or we do this much? Or how did they come at you with that way? Or it was just kind of we don't like how this one's set up?
No, it's a general position on 2-part or events that have multiple scores.
Okay.
that they shared, and they shared their rationale why. And in reading it, it does make sense. I know there were some people that were disappointed by that. Part of me also, when we first put this on paper, wanted it to be that way, but it was one of the things that we agreed to with the PFAA of making, if we do have a 2-part scored event, that we would handle it in that way. Again, I'm not saying that the PFAA is driving the bus by any means. That's something that we could have equally have pushed back on. But when I was explained their rationale, I thought it made sense, and it's something we'll reassess for the future. But given that the tests were so similar, they weren't like 2 completely separate events, just back to back and within the same time that they're taking the competition floor. I just thought it made sense to keep them at 50 and 50. But I have heard the opinion of the opposite, that maybe it should have been 75, 75 or 100.
Like, I'm in the camp as like, I wouldn't, even in this format, I know it's totally what you're saying is 100 and 100 is like, I wouldn't have mind seeing that. I think it rewards athletes who can do both, but there is that side note of like, okay, listen, you can take 3-minute and 5-minute off, maybe win the for time. And there's an average there that people can play with. Like nobody's going to win your event by taking a 0, right? They may score better than they would have if they tried the whole time. There's always that. But I think the way you guys set it up, it would have been okay in that type of format, but I know exactly what you're saying because we've seen that at the CrossFit Games. Like a good example is the sprint shouldered overhead.
Yeah.
Okay, you have one that is running and sprinting and one that is max lifting for reps. Those are not the same thing, and it's okay to give people 100 points for that. But like you said, the fear of the finale in 2011, the CrossFit Games, where it was the same timed format, but it was 100 points for part A, 100 points for part B, and 100 points for part C. I see that. So I can see where you went with both of those.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't an easy decision. And like we've talked about at the onset, always willing to make changes and adjustments. I think this is something we'll reassess and we'll see if it makes sense for the future. But I do think ultimately
it's tough to get right.
Yeah, it is, right? And I think you're not going to make everybody happy with anything. It's impossible to make everybody happy with any of our decisions. And we can only try to cast as wide of a net as possible, make as many people happy as we can, right? It's a large audience to try and appeal to, because it's not just for the elite. We're also programming this for the other 1,000 individual athletes that are competing. And Michael just asked, why give any influence power to the PFA in the first place? Honestly, look, their heads are in the right place. I want to answer that question, which is just that they're coming at this from the perspective of how do we professionalize and help make the sport something that, again, appeals to the 3 things we talked about: fair and safe, 2 of the 3. Fun, that's the part that we can help preserve. So if they were coming at it from a selfish perspective, then maybe that would change my point of view. But if it's generally in the mindset of trying to keep the athletes safe and make the sport fair, then I'm for it. And it helped take a lot of the decision making from our side, or at least suggestions of decision making away. And I honestly think they were extremely helpful. It was a great partnership this year.
Good. I think it's a fair question for those that don't understand the partnership, and I love that you answered it. As we shift from Deja Vu, we go to the barge, we go to Bayside, we're getting wet, and we got 50 and 40 cal echo bike, swim. We always say it's somewhere between 200 to 300 meters, depending on the year.
On the tide.
Like, we always say any type of monostructural distance in the CrossFit space is always an ish, right? Unless they say 5K, we know what happened there. And then we 150 beaded ropes, swim again, 500 meter assault run. I like this where it sits because I think a lot of people, or not a lot of people, some people focused on the lift. Bill and I, we've always said it's like putting in a max lift in a small event sample size is tough if there's nothing to balance it out in the long run. I think this is one of those pieces that did help balance out a 20% event score to a max lift, because this is just straight monostructural. So I feel like there is some balance here when you look at that. Personally, I love this because these are the only things that I can physically do at the moment. You want to get in the water. How, we've been doing it for years, right? How creative or what are the challenges is like, all right, what are we going to do for the swim this year? Because it does limit what you pair with the swim because people are getting out of the water wet.
Yep. 100%. It is tough. The stage is relatively small for the number of athletes we need to put through a swim event. And keep in mind, this one was vastly different than the community events. And that's because the community athletes were performing the following morning the offsite run bike race, which included for the individuals a 50K Cal Echo Bike buy-in plus the 5K run. So that was their long monostructural event, which the teams performed sans the bike. But in this situation, we needed the same to balance out the tests for individuals that are competing on the elite side. And that's just what this did. It'd be easy for us in years past when you look at what we've historically done. There tends to be a sandbag. There tends to be a jump rope. There's there's never going to be a rig involved with whatever this event is that involves the swim. Again, that's really emphasizing the safe perspective. And then the other thing too is you'll never really start with the swim because it needs to be something in which not all 30 athletes are running towards the water at the same time. We also have to structure in a way in which people aren't getting stuck in the water at the time cap because then we have to bring everybody back. So there's all these logistical elements that contribute to actually putting together the final piece of the puzzle. But we thought it was diverse enough. I will tell you the event we almost went with like this close instead of this one was, if you remember the event a few years back called Ski School.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember it. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But it was a buy-in of Cal Ski, and then it involved some sandbag, and then it had swimming, and then it had jump rope. And so the jump rope, though, for every time you broke, it had to be performed in 350 rep sections. If you broke, you added calories to the end of your ski.
Damn.
So instead of bringing that back,
I would hate that one. Unless it was a good day for jump rope.
it was just very similar to what we had done the year before. And while there were still some similar elements with the swimming and the jump ropes, this was different enough and also accomplished that monostructural test that we were seeking.
Well, dude, I love the fact, and it always cracks me up. All these athletes that go to Wodapalooza, there has always been a swim event, and it's amazing. Like, it's nice to see that finally we're starting to see these CrossFit athletes are finally starting to do okay on the swimming. We're seeing caps that are worn the right direction. It's not, you don't have the ridge going across this way anymore.
Oh, who was that did that? That one year in Dubai.
I know. I
Red Bull is not supposed to be on the front,
right.
bro. It is
That's like my headlights right there.
Side logo.
I loved it. I love the fact that the swimming is put in there. I love the fact that, especially when you have multiple swims. And I think that for a swim event, that really is what pushes the CrossFit athletes or any of the athletes that are out there doing that, is the fact that it's not just how do you breathe when you're swimming it. Because, a lot of the athletes that aren't real efficient with their swimming, you can kind of fake your way through it until you're breathing hard and then have to swim. And the second that happens, now you need the efficiency.
Yeah.
And so it's a big difference where you really have to have that skill and that comfort level when you're in the water to really make it work. So I love it. I thought this was awesome. I love every single time there's a swim at the TYR Wodapalooza. Every time it's like, oh man, what's it going to be this time? What's it going to look like this time? It's super cool. So I was stoked on it. I liked it.
And Dylan, you had the 150 double unders in the middle, but specifically beaded rope. And so when I see beaded rope, I'm like, okay, we've seen heavy ropes in competition. We've seen drag ropes. Anytime I've seen a beaded rope, there's that threat of like crossovers or something. It's like in that middle with the rope, how many different things did you think about putting in there, or was it always double unders?
So no, it was always going to be dubs in this situation. We toyed around with what type of rope we would include here.
Okay.
There was a few options, right? The drag rope itself, gets wet and then it becomes unfair from heat to heat. So that was where we're like, okay, maybe the drag rope doesn't make sense. A heavy rope to me just becomes dangerous with shoes being off, and then also, that's just not something that we want to see. But then on the third side of this too is we've seen people use beaded jump ropes quite a bit for, like you said, and whatnot. But in this situation, we wanted to throw something into the mix that might throw folks for a loop and make them think a little bit differently about training with that tool, and had some really good conversations with David Newman about what he thought made the most sense. And that's where we landed. Yeah, I think he's awesome. He's so great. Yeah. And we also made some with some really cool colors as well, and it turned out great.
Yeah, that was pretty sweet. Now, did the athletes have access to this in the warm-up area? Were they given these ropes? How to, like, everyone was walking out with them, so I assume you had them either somewhere in the back or that was theirs to take home?
No, they weren't allowed to take them home, but they did have a bunch in the warm up. We had a team.
Did
of folks
anybody
that were
take
letting
them home?
test.
Did anybody
No,
accidentally, I forgot to turn in my rope?
Throw it in their bag, the pink and blue rope. No, they were pretty good about it. Actually, honestly, David's team was on top of it. They didn't want those things walking off.
Nice. I would have stuffed it in my swimsuit and everybody would have known for sure what I was saying. Yeah, right, bro. You wish.
It was cool.
You wish twice.
It turned out just as well as I could have hoped. And then, that wasn't the only usage of the beaded ropes. They were also used in the community event on Tina Hills. A completely different one. That was just goes to show you like the way in which we puzzle piece things together to ensure that the elite competition from individuals to teams were not too similar, but the community athletes did have some events between individuals and teams that did have some similarities. And this is just an example of that.
And last question here, Bill, if you have one, it's like ending on the runner instead of coming back to the bike. You see this format is like, okay, we went almost a pyramid chipper, but we bookend each one with a different machine. What was the decision that went into that?
There's a ton of things. I think we wanted to see their expression of cardiovascular endurance and monostructural tests. There's not really a better place to put another implement like the runner. And also, like, at this point, their shoes are going to be off, so they're barefoot. We don't want to have their feet on the pedal. That wouldn't be very comfortable. And then also the all-out sprint on the runner we thought was probably the safest thing. We don't want them running. Another big thing you'll notice about the programming is that for a lot of them this year, whereas in the past they would sprint across a finish line, that was not the case here. A lot of times it ended on the final rep, and in this case it was sprint. This was like the one thing that we could do on the stage that would be a sprint to the finish, whereas finishing with a double unders you can only go one speed, so it's just hanging on. In this case it forced them to really leg it out in some of these close tests, and you could actually see their perceived level of exertion on their faces from afar. Whereas with the bike you can go at another lick, but you still can't really tell, but you can tell on the runner.
Totally. Yeah.
Was that decision made prior to weather changes, or was that a weather decision to not run to finish lines?
No, that was something done well in advance. That was something that a decision was made, honestly, mostly last year. Like with the size of the stages, when you sprint across the finish line, like think about Flagler, for example. There's literally that wall right there. You're going to run into the finish line, and people usually book right into it. There was no railings on the Bayside stage.
That's true.
So that was definitely an intentional decision made a long time ago.
Real quick, last question on this one. When you were designing it, the amount of slips that you saw up and down the ramp, coming around when people trying to get up, when they made the turn, trying to get back to their runner, was that what the amount that you thought that would happen with the rain, or were you trying to think, okay, we know they're going to be wet because of running, and if there's a rain contingency, was there any thought of putting anything down to make it more tacky or to make it a little bit more grippy for the athletes, especially when they're going in and out of the water?
I will tell you, the initial intention was to have a turf on that stage. Like it was going to be one big full turf, which I think would have changed the name. That was another pivot that we had to make, just showing you a little bit more behind the curtain. The other thing that I'll tell you that is, another key learning for us is that wherever you put graphics, even though it's called material, that is what's slick. It's not rubber. Rubber's actually pretty tacky. And so you're going to talk about teams tomorrow, but the event on Sunday on Bayside stage with the kettlebell box step overs, we made the determination with the lunges to remove the graphics before the elite started there because it just it was unfair. Like they would have been safe. It would have been fine, but somebody's foot might have slipped out in the back of a lunge and had to drop the kettlebell. So key learnings for us all around. I think it was more slick than what I would have hoped on those things. On the ramp, probably less so. I didn't expect that as much, and it's because we would brief all the athletes, go down the ramp slow or on the side of caution, and then you would see athletes sprinting down and diving in, and the medical team was just like, I told them, and so did the briefing.
I know at the end of the day, what are you gonna do?
I bet. I tell you though, I think the faster the people went, they're the ones that didn't have any issues going. All the people that were careful, they all ended up on their ass and sliding down the little footsteps.
You're right about that. You're right.
No, that was great, and what a great event to have at Bayside. Just everybody out there swimming twice. I thought that was really cool. And this will bring us to the finale, and we have 4-time 90-foot mixed racked position kettlebells with 53 and 35, one in the front rack, one in the overhead rack, into 3 rounds for time, 3 rope climbs for men, 2 for women. The first one must be from a seated position, but they can use their feet once they get off the ground. 18 toes to bar, and then a 90-foot handstand walk done in 30-foot segments, and then a buyout of the kettlebells. And first of all, I love this event. I think the question was like, how much of these kettlebells are really going to affect? We talked about Taylor Self. He tested this coming in, and actually his time held up. I think it was like a top 5 time with the elites. But great. It was like, hey, how much is this really going to affect things at the end? And you saw it had an effect on certain athletes that just didn't have the stamina towards the end. But I'll talk back to what I liked about the last event that we had with the monostructural test and then the heavy lifting test. And aside from the kettlebell lunges, this was a pure gymnastics test. Yeah. So now I go, okay, you smash the weightlifting, you smash the monostructural, and then you smash the gymnastics almost in their own isolated events. That's how it's done, right? Yeah. Instead of 1 and 6 other random tests that are just, general mixed modal domains, is like you put in 3 unique tests in their own version. And I really, I appreciated that. I don't know if that was your intent or that's how it worked out on purpose, but whatever it was that you ended up doing, I really love that you balanced those things out.
There certainly was intention there. I would tell you that this was not the event that I originally intended to be the finale for individuals.
Okay.
It just happened as such. Ideally those 3 that you mentioned would have been on day 1, and then the next day would be more classic.
Okay. All right, Dylan. I was going to ask that question at the end. That's great.
So, ideally, it's the schedule for the event is a real puzzle. Like it is a puzzle. It is. Yeah. Imagine making all of these pieces fit, and Joaquin Perez Borrego, our competition director, works tirelessly on it. It's the most probably that. I don't want to say it's the most challenging because there's a lot of challenging parts of producing this event, but that is one that is very, very tough. So you'll know to making it all fit. And that's why this one ended up being the finale, but I do think it played out to be still exciting. And I really enjoyed this one as well. This was one of those that we were able to preserve the original programming, which I was happy about.
How hard, what, you don't have to tell us what the contingency was, but like, is this the one you looked at? You're like, please God, don't rain, because it's not even going to be the same. Like we got close stimulus in the other ones, and this one, there's nothing I see here when it rains that you can do.
Right.
The document that we have, I think it says it better not rain in red.
Contingency plan. We're just like, we're just.
It would have been rain delay or and we did toy around with these thoughts of like, okay, well, what if we just like push individual competition to the following day and like the team starts in the afternoon? Yeah. Like none of those scenarios would make any sense. It would have thrown everything off. This was one, I'm going to tell you right now, it would have had to be a completely different test. And we didn't, and this is one that genuinely we didn't have programmed because we had to execute. So we did change it. We did have one version, but it was so similar to some of the things we did the day before that like we were looking at each of the days isolated, saying like, okay, if it rains this day, it's not going to rain the following day. So like, we'll be good. We'll be able to take those elements. So they were so similar. In this scenario, we were just like, all right, well, what do we do now with rope climbs? We can't do any more strict pull-ups. So anyway, that's really what the result was.
All right. So order of events. I'm just going to throw this out there of dream scenario, right? You don't have 2,000 other athletes to worry about in 48 divisions. I would say I would go lifting event first, monostructural event second on Bayside. This would be the Thursday night event finale. And then we would do Cortadito and then the final be that 3-5 finale, marching your way down to the finish line with a dumbbell snatch to win Wodapalooza. That would have been dream scenario in my head, because what I think is like, okay, we hit weightlifting, monostructural, and gymnastics on day 1. who sits at the top of the leaderboard? Oh, sorry, you're good at all these individuals, and now we have just
Straight
two mixed
CrossFit.
modal, just
Yep.
slugfest ones on Friday.
I could have easily seen it playing out similarly.
Yeah. I don't think it would change anything. I just like in my dream, seeing how these events. It's like I love the idea of putting those 3 on day 1 and then the mixed modal on day 2, and just like a march to the finish line with 3, 5, 8 minutes to go for the finale. Not saying it would have changed anything for the leaderboard, but I just that setup.
The 2 scores on the final, what I like about that is it leaves some ambiguity and guesswork on the end of the attendee or fan at home, because they have to do quite a bit of math to try and calculate. So it left sort of some gray.
Yeah.
Announce the winner, they don't really know, because there's some more complicated math they would have had to solve to try and figure it out. Right.
Yeah, I do like that.
Yeah, certainly that's one way in which it could have played out for sure.
I tell you, for an event that's been around for so long and is so established, I like, and we hear this all the time. Why can't you just have a lifting, straight lifting, a straight monostructural, a straight gymnastic, and that right there, you should almost be branding who your best athlete is. And you virtually did that almost kind of hidden, because you did a complex, you did a mixed metcon, checking a whole bunch of different boxes there, and then this is a strictly gymnastic movement with just like little bookends on either side. I mean, you kind of look like it, and that all of a sudden, because you have those on either end with the kettlebells, now you don't see it as all gymnastic, but that's purely what it is. You know what I mean? So you have that, and that's over the halfway point of all the points that you have scored based on single modality, and then you have your 2 mixes right on either side of that to be able to kind of blend and be like, okay, well, who's our athlete? So it's interesting, coming back around, you said safety, you said fair, you said fun, and you didn't say fitness. You didn't say like how well-rounded you wanted that to be. And as of what you're looking at right now, dude, you did a pretty dang good job of holding those things together as far as making it fitness. And, we see a lot of events, we talk about a lot of programming, what types of things we're missing, or what sort of stimuluses we're missing. And the less events you have, the more difficult it is to really be able to accomplish that goal. I mean, unless you're 2007 CrossFit Games, when you did that, you have your monostructure, you got your gymnastics, you know what I mean? So I really I thought that was awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's where the fair comes into play. I think fair is more about the well-rounded test. I totally hear you. I think that's sometimes the third piece of the puzzle compared to those other 2. But every year it sort of varies based on the feedback we get. And this year, for sure, safety was number 1, but fair was up there for sure.
Totally. And at the end of the weekend, this isn't some people say this is like, oh, well, no matter what the programming was, Rich was going to win. Matt was going to win. Tia was going to win. And Bill and I have always pushed back against that sentiment, because just because the programming didn't matter to them, it doesn't mean that the programming doesn't matter. It has a massive impact on who does and doesn't sit at the top of the leaderboard over the course of the weekend. And with all the hurdles and challenges that you guys had to push through, break through, and hop over, with no other option but to just charge ahead, you look at what happened over the end of the weekend, and you look at the leaderboard as a bit of an example of like, look, yes, some of the events may change, or this moved and that changed, but you look at who finished and how well they competed over the course of the weekend. And I think still the best people in that position won Wodapalooza.
I would agree. Definitely on the individual side, that was the case, right? I think the teams are a little bit more of a mixed bag, and you'll talk tomorrow.
That's crapshoot no matter what. Like, who's going to win? That's different. That's a lot. That's a bigger challenge.
There are a lot more variables with the team side than the indies. But yeah, I would say, right, you're 100%. The fittest emerge victorious, as you mentioned, and like you said, it didn't matter what was thrown at them, what those changes were, and that's what we sought out to do. So I'm happy that was the end result. And again, hindsight being 2020, I could have said going into the weekend that would have been the case. I would hope so. But it did play out as such. So I'm happy, and I know our team is too.
And Dylan, speaking of that specifically, is 2 weeks of build up for Wodapalooza, a full week of competition, and all the things that you had to deal with. You're currently still breaking everything down until Friday or Saturday. It's been almost it's been a month, but it's probably felt like a year. At the end of the weekend, after you got to see everything unfold, how do you feel with how 2024 TYR Wodapalooza went?
I would say that I am left very fulfilled. Um, I think that it went as well as it possibly could have, given the circumstances, and it leaves me very optimistic for the future and everything that we have on the horizon. Namely, because I think we have a really great partner in TYR. They're awesome and extremely supportive. They're a company that really are fans of the sport and the community, and they're pressing us forward. I would say,
how much of a game changer is it to have TYR back you in the way they do to support this competition?
it's different than anything I've experienced before. They are vested in this. This is not just a let's give you some cash and you put our logos on things. They want to be involved in the decision making. They want to be involved in helping elevate the experience and the competition, which is, again, we've had some big sponsors as part of our event in the past that are of a similar category over the years, and none of them have quite contributed as much as TYR has. And the connection that they have to the event, you can tell that this really means something to them, and they show it in their products, one, and then also in the way that they handle the contribution to give back to athletes, to volunteers, how they're continuing to sign the best athletes in the sport and press it forward. They want to continue to do more and more, and they're really pushing us to be better, and I appreciate that big time. So that's one. And then two, what else leaves me really optimistic for the future would be our team. As I've mentioned maybe 100 times, like I mean it. The people that are behind this event are far more than me. I know we're a small team, but the people that come and either work over the weekend or the 2 weeks or month, 3 months, they're seasonal staffers up and down. The way that they responded in the face of what was a really, really challenging month, and then ultimately weekend, gives me all the confidence in the world that we're going to hit a home run on the next events that we have on the horizon. So those two things, and then finally the fans, the community's response to what it is that we're doing in the face of all that rain. Like, people showed up in droves, they followed from afar, and they give me hope that the sport is in a good place, and that the TYR Wodapalooza brand is well liked and respected, and we're going to continue to do everything in our power to try and make good on our promise to continue to deliver exceptional experiences to athletes, fans, brands, and more. So, I think the future's bright. I'm left confident, albeit a little tired. I'm going to sleep probably for a month. But I can't really sleep that long because the planning.
Yeah, not too much, bro. Open's coming. And I'll finish with this question for the Wad Zombie is, before you go, Dylan, can we get anything? Little behind, little tidbit, a little nugget, secrets or details to reveal about Wodapalooza SoCal coming in September?
The only thing that I will say is that there's more information coming really soon. I'm not going to leave you just with that. That's
cool.
A lot of information coming out real soon. No, what I will say is that the format of the elite competition that we are going to be bringing to the public by way of the TYR Wodapalooza SoCal is something that we haven't seen in quite a while. And I think it's something that people have been missing, with our own unique flavor to it. That I think is going to, if folks have maybe lost their luster for the sport and they're just bored by it, this I think is going to reinvigorate them in a way that will hopefully bring them back into the fold and want to follow. It's going to be vastly different than what we have in Miami. That doesn't mean to say
wow,
a great community event in SoCal, but from the perspective, it's something that you're not going to want to miss, and that if you're planning on a vacation at any point, I'd probably mark the 20th, the 22nd of September in Huntington Beach, because it's going to be an amazing time, both for the fitness and the nation.
I love it. So you're bringing some old school back. So Bill and I will we'll see it. I'm just kidding. I'm just
come on over. Bill's gonna be
hey, what's good friends if we can't bust some balls on my. Well, hey, Dylan, listen, sincerely, thank you for coming on the show. I know you hate doing podcasts, but so thank you for carving out a lot of time with us. I mean, shoot, we've been talking over an hour and a half, but thank you for all the work you put into this, because I feel like it's really easy. And look, I'll raise my hand. And it's like, I've done it with lots of competitions in the past to pick and criticize, and whether it's right or wrong, maybe the timing of that isn't at the best format or how it's done, but what you have done and continue to do and have built over a very long sense of time with Wodapalooza, being in the position you're in now with Loud and Live and what you guys have created, I just want to say personally, thank you. because Wodapalooza is one of my favorite times of years, from a fan, from a commentator, from an athlete, even though I guess maybe I should try to, 40 plus now. Maybe I can make it. Who knows? But I just want to say thank you. And for all the fans around the world, thank you for what you do, what you continue to do. And I'm so pumped for SoCal.
Yeah, man, I got to jump on that bandwagon too. I'm fired up of what you've done for the community, because I think that's a big deal. I mean, the comment is always, if you can't go to the CrossFit Games, you got to go to Wodapalooza. I mean, that is, we've said that a million times, and if anyone ever asks us, I mean, that is because of the experience. And I'm not even talking just the athlete experience. I'm talking the fan experience, all the different division experience, all that kind of stuff. It's a really big deal. So we know how important it is to you. One of the things that I'm really glad you came on the show and were able to talk about was not just the fact that you made switches, but the why you made the switches. Because, for us, I mean, and we are program nerds, and we talk about programming, we talk about numbers, we talk about the intents, but a lot of times if we don't know that, I mean, we can't talk to every single person that does their event, so we don't always know that. So we don't always know the exact why. So hearing your why of a lot of the things, hearing why you decided to bring this event back, and why you called it Deja Vu, and why did you want to see if people from your qualifiers were actually able to qualify with the weights they were doing. Why is that important to you? Because you want to see that they're going to be able to compete efficiently, in front of everybody. All of these reasons I think is cool, because even as a programmer, when we're talking just general programmers, there always has to be that big picture down to the minute picture. And that's what I really like, that in our conversation, we're back and forth seeing that. So that's really important. Dude, I really can't wait to see what you guys do with Huntington Beach. I think that the TYR Wodapalooza SoCal, I'm excited and anxious to see what it's going to be, because that's whenever anyone branches away from their normal setup, it's like it's exciting and nerve-wracking all at the same time. So I got my fingers crossed for you guys, man. I can't wait to see it.
Thank you both for having me. And I hope my explanations made sense. And I'm also excited to share with the world what it is that we have up our sleeves. The entire team has been working tirelessly to bring it to life, and alongside TYR, really hand in hand with them. So more to come very soon. I mean, like within the next couple of weeks, you're going to start seeing some details.
I love it. I love it. Well, Dylan, thanks to you. Thanks to Aladdin Live. Thank you to TYR, and thank you to Wodapalooza for what you guys put on. Can't wait to see what's coming in September, but can't wait to see what's coming in June, July. Don't forget about that, people, because Tennis Stadium. I'm just going to throw that out there. It's coming back. Right. Dylan, thank you so much. Thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you guys tomorrow when we talk teams.